Welcome to technical session number 40. And as we are aware, we do jump around a little bit in order to kind of keep all the sessions on pace with our other assignments. And if we are operating above T32, we know we are in the 1102 material, not the 1101. So this is going to be for the second part of the exam, not the hardware portion. So our objectives for this particular technical session are going to be to describe at a high level the similarities and differences between mobile operating systems and other operating systems, and then compare and contrast the most widely used mobile operating systems, including Android, iOS, and Windows, including some of their most common functions and stuff like that. Behavior skills and mindsets we want to keep in play while we were going through this is communication. Huge part in IT, it's how we solve problems, and not just between our customers, but also being able to hand off issues as well as getting the help we need from our coworkers, because each team has differing skill sets. And much like our team here, I may be knowledgeable about one area but less knowledgeable in another, where Rachel is going to be more knowledgeable than me. And then also Terrence may have higher knowledge in some areas where Rachel and I are kind of short on it. So that being said, that is going to be typical in almost any team you work with. Some people may be better at networking. Some people may be better at telecoms. Some people may be better at security. And you need to play to those strengths. Also maintaining a growth mindset, understanding that the intelligence that we have is not fixed. All right, the rise of the mobile operating system. We have come a long way from the satchel and brick phones of the late 80s, early 90s. And the expectations and wants that we have from our mobile devices have evolved immensely. They've gone from being a status symbol that was occasionally convenient to being almost a necessity in daily life, not just for communication, but for information. And many people can do almost the entirety of their jobs off of a cell phone. Emails, phone calls, direct messages, many of the programs we have can work. And all of this is made possible through the operating system platforms that we utilize. They allow greater mobility with regards to basic tasks that we try to accomplish from day to day. They support a much smoother user experience, especially from those of the past. If any of y'all had phones in the late 90s, early 2000s and had to send a text message, you remember like to get this, C, you had to press 3 times. And then, so it was a whole lot of like repetitive clicking on individual buttons, because you only had like a little 10-key keypad until, BlackBerry came out with their full-blown QWERTY keyboard. And that was the most awesome thing ever. And then eventually Apple just comes out and goes, we'll raise the bar. We'll eliminate the keyboard altogether. And thus, the systems have continued to evolve to this day. Although the keypads and physical keyboards do still have their place, especially for those with visual impairments. For the most part, things have gone full touchscreen. How do mobile operating systems differ from their much more heavyweight counterparts in the laptop and desktop arena? Well, they're almost strictly touchscreen at this point. You can add on a keyboard and mouse functionality if you need to. If you're going to be doing like a lot of email typing and stuff like that, that's fine. They do make some great mobile keyboards or mobile mice that are like little travel ones that are real small, make life a little bit easier for you. But for the overwhelming majority of the time, touchscreen interface. They are much more limited in their power capabilities as compared to, say, a laptop. But then it's also not running a much heavier version of the operating system. It's, the screen isn't as intense, all that kind of fun stuff. So they're able to still be comparable on their lifestyle or their lifespan through heavy use, to these other mobile devices like a laptop, or, it's hard to compare to a desktop where it's plugged into the power source at all times. But mobility is not there either. Has very limited RAM. It's unfortunately not something that you can expand upon in a phone. Yet maybe somebody will figure that one out in the near future. But currently, RAM is not expandable, though memory is, depending on your carrier, the type of phone you utilize. And nicely, it supports both cellular and Wi-Fi communication and uses similar connectivity protocols other than Ethernet. Current operating system market out there. Android, big dog on the block, around 70%. This is as of 2019. Although this hasn't really shifted much, other than I don't even think Windows has 0.07% anymore. I think they have basically zero at this point. There may be some hobbyists out there that still have them, but for the most part, they don't really exist. So Android around 70%, iPhones about another quarter, roughly, or just over a quarter of market share. So basically 98% is just two carriers at this point. So mobile device operating systems are typically developed for specific devices, and iPhone or iOS is proprietary to Apple devices. It is not used on other devices at that point. And then basically Android is everyone else. Windows, not a market anymore. There were others that kind of came and went: BlackBerry, Symbian, HP, WebOS, Bada, Migo, and there still are some people that use them. But again, overwhelmingly Android and iOS, and there are specific reasons for this. iOS, typically utilized in all Apple devices, be it tablets or iPhones. It used to be iPads, but not iPad, iPods, excuse me. But the iPods have kind of gone by the wayside for the most part because the phone fills that function. So you had the iPods, the phones, and the tablets or iPads. It's built on top of the Unix kernel, and it is closed source or proprietary, meaning they do not share their code. Technicians do not have access to the source code. It is completely kept in-house. So if you want to develop applications, you have to use what's called an SDK, or software development kit, where you're given plugins and stuff like that that will allow your application to work. And in order to utilize that, you would typically have to register as an Apple developer, and your apps typically have to go through a semi-rigorous process in order to be sold on the App Store, which is where typically the only place where you can buy apps for an iPhone. Now, if you go out on the internet, yes, there are other places you can get apps. Apple does their very best to combat this. So they will, change their programming to shut down various apps and things like that that they consider to be not approved. And they do this to try to minimize the potential for malware or other malicious software getting onto your phone. Did any, who here did not realize you actually need antivirus and anti-malware software for your phone, and your phone can actually contract software viruses? Is anybody not aware of this? No, everybody's aware of this? Awesome. So, Apple iOS, Unix-based kernel, closed source proprietary, meaning only they have the code. and you have to use an SDK or software development kit if you are a third party wanting to develop a application for the market. Google Android. Here's why they have basically complete market dominance on this. It's built on top of a Linux kernel, which many of you are developing a fondness for over the last few weeks. And it has a core set of libraries that are built in Java, which is a web-based applications. And the mobile operating system is what's called open source, basically meaning everyone has access to the source code. So it's free. The actual source code for this is absolutely free. And it is maintained by what's called the Open Handset Alliance, which are a group of individuals who test, update, and maintain the code. Unlike iOS, which has like version like 10.3.7 or something along those lines, Android refers to their releases in alphabetical order. I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but they were doing this for many years. So you can see they use some sort of like candy or desserts. You have Jelly Bean, Kit Kat, Lollipop, Marshmallow, Nougat, Oreo, and they kind of have been going through the alphabet. Are they still doing this to this day? Anybody tell me? Nobody knows. We'll double check on that. All right. Oops.
I think they stopped doing that now. Because the last one is just, yeah, I think it's now based on numbers.
Based on numbers?
Yeah, so now I think it's 13 the latest.
That's less fun. All right, so they've gone to the standard naming format of numbers, which is, is what it is. Windows Phone OS. Again, doesn't really exist anymore, but just to kind of give you the information, because it may pop up, like you may have a question on it or something. It's closed source, just like iOS. It was based on the Windows NT kernel, and the developers created mobile applications providing them on the Windows Store. And they did this and then dumbed down their operating system so that it operated just like it. And that was how they made a lot of their customers mad. So this operates off of that Metro UI using the tile system and all that fun stuff. And so their thought process on this is you would have a universal experience, whether or not you're using a phone, a tablet, or a desktop. Everything was the same, and it could all be synchronized across all devices. Wonderful thought. Unfortunately, with that thought, you can only operate at the computing power of your weakest link. So their desktops became, had to be dumbed down significantly in order to accomplish this, which did not make businesses happy or customers happy. Like, why am I going to buy, souped up software or build out my PC, to do all this stuff when the operating system on it can't handle it? So this kind of went by the wayside and doesn't really exist anymore. Other ones that kind of came and went, we did see this before. You had your BlackBerry OS, terminated in 2013. Symbian, HP WebOS, we talked about this quite a while ago. And then there was the Tizen, which is is another Linux-based one. They tried to get into the mobile market, were not successful, but managed to actually kind of segue into smart TVs and car entertainment systems and have run away with it. And they're doing absolutely fantastic, now maintaining, I think, just north of 21% at this point. That was Tizen. All right. We need to make a slight change to this slide. Nix this out. iPhone, iPads, and the iOS, pretty much everybody else is Android. Easy way to remember it. Simplifies it in the extreme at this point. So if it is a version of an Apple, it has iOS on it. Everything else, Android. Why? Because the operating system is free. So why would your company not want to use it? So a lot of companies use Android, but each one of these individual companies may have their own bloatware, I guess you could say, that they will add on there. So they may have, may require you to have a Gmail account on some of them because it's a Google-based device, or it may, have other varieties of software on there that are specific to those particular makers. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. Questions so far? We have other stuff to talk about. All right. Open source versus closed source. We talked about this. Closed source, basically, they don't share their code. We're not going to tell you how the secret sauce is made. That has its pluses and it has its minuses. But they give SDKs, software development kits, so that other companies can develop applications to use on it to gain functionality. Kind of nice, but again, other programmers can't see the code, so they can't, in theory, mimic what they're doing. The software is licensed for use, but it is still kept within the control of the original publisher. That being said, if you own an iPhone, if you own a Windows machine, if you own a Mac or any of that stuff, you do not own the software that is on that computer. So for any reason, if they feel you have violated the license agreement, or for whatever reason they deem necessary, because they usually put that at the bottom too, they can revoke your license and remove the software from your computer or your iPhone or your desktop. Next, you have the Android open source, licensed to the developer community to be further developed, shared, and sometimes marketed, which is great. Google Android is one of the most common ones of this, but there are a lot of other varieties out there. So Google has similar licensing agreements. If you violate their terms, they can revoke your licenses, but there are many other flavors of Android out there that you can download and utilize yourself. So in that, you can get something that is a very, very comparable user experience, even if you don't utilize the Google one. All right. So above and beyond the operating system, what about the stuff that makes it more useful, fun, entertaining, and practical? Our applications. This is what kind of sets our phones aside from the phones of yesteryear, when you just flipped it open, made a phone call, and sent an occasional text. Now we can navigate, we can check our bank accounts, we can make investments, we can play games, we can yell at strangers on the internet, and we can research anything we don't know. The important stuff. Like who starred in that movie back in the 1980s? So we have a ton of information and accessibility and functionality at our fingertips. And this is made possible through the applications that we can use on our operating systems. Now, how do we access these? How do we get these? Well, in the iPhone, you have the App Store, which looks like the old compass here. And then for Android phones, you have the Google Play Store, but this is not the only shop for Google. It is just the primary. There are tons of third-party markets that you can utilize to gain applications with the Android phone system. And then, again, for the 5 users that still have it, there's the Windows Store. All right. Screen, screen orientation. This was another thing that added functionality. We were not stuck in a single fixed view. We could either have it in portrait or landscape now. And inside the phone, there's a built-in gyroscope that can tell the computer in the phone what orientation the phone is in. So it knows right off the bat whether the phone is vertical or horizontal. And it changes the application orientation with regards to that positioning. It also makes a lot of different games possible, games where you're like steering the car, where you're like turning the phone in various directions. The gyroscope is what makes it possible. There's also built-in compasses in many of them. So you can actually download compass apps, and then they would tell you to kind of hold the phone flat and run in a figure 8 motion, and then it would be able to tell you where true north was at that point. Beyond that, to add even more functionality, we had the accelerometer, which tells you how fast the phone is going. So again, works for games, but also travel. How fast are you traveling? Because in a lot of cases, with regards to GPS, especially if we live in big cities, we do not have the benefit of having line of sight on the horizon to get enough satellites to actually tell our position. So we have to use our speed, cell towers, and then maybe 1 or 2 satellites in order to determine exactly where we are. So there's a lot of calculations that go into that. Questions on this? There you go. The gyroscope always gets me, like if you're trying to look at something, like if the phone didn't register orientation when you took a picture, so you took a picture where you thought was horizontally, but the phone was still registering itself as vertical, and then when you're trying to look at the picture, it's constantly shifting it so that you can't get a good look at it. It's not always perfect, especially the older the phone gets, but it's kind of nice. So types of touch screens. Remember, we talked about this before. There are 2 distinct types of touch screens. There is resistive and capacitive. Resistive, think of it as resisting. It's based upon pressure. So the more you push on it, that's how it's registering, where exactly you're touching on the screen. Those have to be calibrated on a regular basis. So you have to go in and actively say, touch the upper left corner, touch the bottom right corner, touch the center. And through that, it can calibrate where the actual contact is being made on it. Most modern cell phones do not have this. There are still some tablets that utilize it in warehousing and more industrial sense. But for the most part, everything is now in the arena of capacitive touch. They don't typically require ongoing calibration, but every time you restart the phone, it calibrates it automatically. Which is why they say, like, if your touchscreen is not responding, go ahead and restart the phone, because it'll go ahead and recalibrate it once it does a startup. But for the most part, phones never get turned off. They're pretty much on all the time. And like I said, this is what we're just talking about, a calibration error. That's kind of like when you're touching it, it's not responding. That's when you would turn it off, turn it back on. That usually helps. Some of them have built-in calibration tools that you can utilize, and that's basically like what we were just saying, where it's like touch the upper left corner, touch the upper right corner, touch the bottom, center, touch the middle of the screen, and then through all of that, it will resynchronize your calibration. All right. Positioning and geolocation. This is essentially providing your relative and absolute position of a device from the viewpoint of the planet and space. Awesome, right? So inside, like we were talking about a couple screens ago, you have the magnetometer, and this essentially allows you to use your phone like a compass, so you can find magnetic north. The other way is the GPS built in. GPS requires you to have line of sight of 3 satellites minimum for GPS to work. So line of sight, I need to be able to actually see 3 points in the sky where satellites are. these satellites in the GPS system, I think there's 128 of them floating around. I have to remind myself on that one really quick. There we go. Oh, sorry. 24 satellites that make it up. I thought it was 124. So no, it's 24. GPS is the US based version. They do have a European version. They do have an African version. They do have a South American version. And China kind of has a version as well. And each uses a varying number of satellites. And for ours, we need 3 to be able to pinpoint your location. And a 4th will give you altitude. So 3 will give you 2-dimensional location on the surface. A 4th will give you altitude, like how high up you are. Again, in the city, this is hard to do. So they can use cell towers and Wi-Fi systems to be able to locate where you are. So it's assisted GPS. It's slightly less accurate, but based on your movements, like if you're in a car or something like that, they can kind of get a relatively decent idea as to where you are, which is why sometimes when you're traveling in a GPS in the city and the road forks, it'll show you traveling along one road and then jump to the other, because it's utilizing those cell towers, Wi-Fi, and then it may only have 1 or 2 GPS towers to go off of, and it's kind of making an assumption as to where you are based upon how the phone is moving. So these satellites, nothing fancy is happening in these satellites. They're basically sending out electronic pings. Each satellite sends out a unique ping, and based on the timing it takes to receive those pings, in your phone, it is going to make the calculations as to where you are. The satellites don't make the calculation. All that technology resides in the receiver in your phone. Does this make sense? All right. Geo-tracking and geotagging. All right. So geo-tracking, both Android and iOS record the location of your device. And depending on the applications you're using, what you allow, share that information with other people. And periodically we'll send this information to particular locations based upon what you have agreed to, what you allow, and vice versa. This is obviously a controversial issue because it feels like a violation of your privacy that you're being tracked all the time. Some employers track their employees based upon their phones. They're supposed to tell you that they're doing this thing, but they do, especially if you're something like a driver, or if you are running routes or something like that, or a salesperson. They may track where you are at any given time. Simple rule: if you look in the top corner of your phone and you see a little arrow there, your location is being tracked at that time. Bad news is even if the arrow is absent, it does not mean you're not being tracked. So kind of is what it is. Geotagging, and we can use similar information to kind of add location information to other forms of media, such as photos taken. So when you take a photo, I don't know if any of you ever heard to say like, well, the metadata does not add up on this. The metadata says you were in some other place. So when you take a photo on your phone, it embeds code in that photo that says where you were, what time of day it was, what date it was when you took that picture. All that information is coded into every photo that is taken. So it's a form of geotagging. This is something that is relatively easy to disable if you wish to, but it is a very, very common practice with smartphones, tablets, and now digital cameras do the same thing. Questions so far? Oh yeah, Justin, I can believe it. They would track the van. All right. Wi-Fi calling. This is similar to voice over IP for those of us who may not have unlimited data or unlimited minutes on our phone. We can now utilize, or for some time, utilize Wi-Fi signals that we are attached to, like if we're at the house. We can switch over to Wi-Fi calling, not use our cellular minutes or data, and make calls that way. It's a wonderful feature. And instead of operating over cellular towers, it operates over the network via your IP. And it's through a protocol called GAIN, or Generic Access Network. And the nice thing is it utilizes a common 802.11 connection, which we will be getting into 802.11, I believe, on a week from today. We'll get into different flavors of that. And this conserves data, like we were just saying. And when it's working properly, you don't notice when you switch between the two. Unfortunately, technology does not always work properly. And there are many, many cases where when you try to switch from cellular to Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi to cellular calling, call is dropped. And it's kind of like certain mesh networks. If you're operating on a phone and you're on a wireless mesh in your house, if you have multiple nodes in your house, when your phone switches from one node to the other, it's also common for the phone call to drop. It's supposed to work in a perfect way, but it doesn't always do that, unfortunately. Questions so far? So it's a little bit better now. All right, launcher or GUI. The launcher is the screen where the icons are all located. So this is like your home screen when you first open up the phone, and you have all your apps there where you can go through and select which one you want to utilize. So this is called your launcher. And this is essentially basically just the operating system or a program that is used to locate and start other programs. And it is based in a graphical user interface, or GUI, which is extremely helpful on a touchscreen. Now, yes, there are phones, especially Linux-based phones, that have command line in them. So you can operate your phone via command line. So that is a thing. It's not a very common one, but yes, you can do it. So Android, like Apple, allows users to kind of personalize the launcher and use many different types of ones they wish, with some dedicated to like specific functions. Like if you want to have it to where it's always showing you the weather in your area. So like I've seen where people open up their phone and it's got like a bright sunny day. Other days they'll open up their phone and it's got like a thunderstorm going on. So you always have the weather application for where you're at running in the background of your launcher. Apple wants a uniform experience for everybody, so they do not allow people to change the feel of the launcher itself. You can change what it looks like add a picture or something like that, but the overall feel is the same no matter which one you use. Unless you do what's called jailbreaking your phone. And if you jailbreak your phone, any warranty that was based on your phone at that point is void. So that's one of the mechanisms that they have in place for that. Virtual assistants. iOS has Siri, which unfortunately over time, because of its closed source nature and the lack of ability to interact with it, has become very antiquated and not very useful. Beyond basic tasks, it doesn't really seem to grow or develop. Android has a variety you can use, like the infamous, "Hey Google, please set an alarm for 3 a.m." So that one is a pretty common one. And then Windows had the Cortana one, which is now more strictly a desktop app at this point. Although the new AI models that they're utilizing, like ChatGPT and all that stuff, they're creating virtual assistant versions of these, which are going to pretty much knock a lot of these older ones out of the water once they're active, in both good and bad ways. All right, we talked about the SDKs for Apple, software development kits. And then Google has ADKs for application development kits. And these are tools for third parties to use to kind of build applications to load them in. Windows Mobile, again, don't need to worry about that one at this point. Now, applications for Android, it doesn't even matter what you build it on. You can build it on a Linux machine, you can build it on a Mac, you can build it on Windows, doesn't matter. As long as you're using that development kit, you'll be able to upload it or interact with the Android Studio or the phone itself. And Android has their own format standard that they call APK, or Android Application Package. Questions so far? All right. Emergency notification. I don't know who has not experienced the joy of your phone screaming at you at 2 a.m. because of a variety of alerts. So they have a few of them here. They had extreme weather warnings. You have amber alerts for children, or silver alerts for seniors, locations emergencies, like if you live in Florida and a hurricane's bearing down on you, to let you know that you need to take immediate action or evacuate. And then they had a few years ago added also the presidential alert, or warning for national emergencies and stuff like that. So these are things you can turn off if you wish, but they do serve a pretty good function for the most part. Questions on this? Oops. Go. And lastly, but certainly not least, mobile payment services. This is becoming more and more a part of our daily lives, because we seem to be linking every aspect of our life to these devices we carry on a regular basis. There are various mobile payment services that you can utilize. There's Google Pay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. They have ones that can be utilized for credit cards and stuff like that. Most popular being Square. You guys have Stripe. And, the nice thing is it turns over, and then there's, Venmo, and a couple other direct payment services you can utilize depending on your banking system. And it basically allows us to digitally send and receive money, which is nice. In many respects, it makes it a lot easier for small business or entrepreneurs to kind of get businesses off the ground, rather than utilizing the old school credit card services where you had to have network connections, like Ethernet connections, and it was a lot more tedious and problematic, especially with regards to doing things like if you had a traveling business where you went to various conventions or showcases and stuff like that. It made it a lot harder for you to operate. Now you can just utilize cellular service and directly send and receive payments through your phone. So big up for that. Questions or comments on this? All right. That about sums it up. So we should be able to describe at a high level some of the similarities or differences between mobile operating system and other operating system. We should be able to compare and contrast some of the most widely used mobile operating systems, including Android, iOS, and no longer Windows. And some of the common features that kind of run the gambit between the two. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, revelations. Very quiet group today.